Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lori Jones-Curtis. Dr. Lori Jones-Curtis is a lifelong educator who believes that when we support teachers, we support everything that matters in education. Amen. With more than 40 years in the classroom and in teacher preparation, she has seen how connection, consistency, and compassion create the conditions where both students and teachers thrive. Through her teaching virtually was brief, it left a lasting impression, reshaping how she thought about the assumptions, tone, and the need for authentic connection, even through the screen. Amen. Those sessions deepened her belief that learning is always personal, and a strong relationships, high expectations, and self-control, not programs, make the difference. Today, Lori's work centers around sustaining the heart of teaching. She helps educators reconnect with their purpose, strengthens the classroom culture, and makes small, practical shifts that have a big impact. Whether online or in person, her message remains the same. Students flourish when the teacher feels grounded, supported, and reminding that what they do matters. Lori, looking forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Hi, guys. I'm Lori. I am in Texas, just outside of Waco, a little town in Central Texas. And so I've been in education for 4 decades. And when the COVID hit, I got to teach virtually. And y'all, that year and a half that I did that changed my life as a teacher. So it was only a year and a half, so I don't claim to be an expert at all on virtual education, but I learned some very, very powerful things that year and a half. So it all started in March of 2020. We were on spring break. And then that's when I know all the schools in America shut down. I'm not sure about everybody else, but we went virtual for those last 3 months of the year. But we have about 2,000 kids in our district, and I was a 5th grade math teacher. And so the district got Chromebooks for all of the kids and made sure they all had internet or hotspots or whatever you do to connect to the internet. But they were very, very picky about what we as teachers did. We created our lessons, excuse me, and it all was done through Google Classroom, and everything was just done in writing. We were not allowed to have any contact with our kids. We couldn't do Google Meets or Zoom or any kind of virtual thing, and we couldn't email the kids either. It all had to go through the Google Classroom. And I remember we were doing coordinate grid at that time and trying to teach kids how to do coordinate grid, because that's the first time they'd ever seen it, and having to do that only through written instructions, how hard that was. But I also thought about, because, since I was 5th grade and my kids moved on to another building at the end of the year. So those kids, we left for spring break, and then some of them I never ever saw again. And it was just so hard not having that connection. And I think it was so hard for the kids because they didn't have anybody to check in to help them. They didn't have anybody that made sure they were doing their work. And the way our district set it up, if you did your assignments, you passed. And if you didn't do your assignments, you still passed. Well, come the next year, the district decided to offer virtual education for students and asked me if I would teach the 5th grade virtual class. So we had kids who were whose parents chose for them to be virtual all year. And then I also was responsible for the kids who were quarantined, because they had COVID or their mother had COVID or they saw somebody at Walmart that had COVID, because everything, oh my gosh, everything was so scary back then. So when I started setting up my class, and I was also doing reading, writing, math, history, and science. So I had all of 5th grade. About October that year, they asked me if I would also take on 3rd grade. So I had 3rd grade reading, writing, math, science, and history classes. I don't think I've ever worked so hard in my life, but I've never learned so much about who I was, not just as a teacher, but kind of also as a human being. And so when I set up my class, I wanted the kids to be able to feel like they were in a real classroom. I didn't want them to feel like they were alone. And so when I had my class, we would have jobs. And so students did things like the tech support people, because I am not the most tech savvy person in the world. And so they would help me with the tech. There were kids that kind of managed the chat room, kids that planned parties. We had a Christmas party and a Valentine's party and an into school party. And then I also set up the day. So there were specific periods for the different subjects. We would 2 days a week, we would do math and science. And then the other 2 days we would do ELAR and social studies. And then I always made Friday a day. Sometimes it was a testing day, or I would integrate the lessons during that time. But I also had a time for tutorials, because I didn't want the kids to feel like they were just left alone. I also wanted them to know that I was watching and that they actually had to do their work. And so they knew from 7:30 until 4:30 every single day that their teacher was there. And they could get online at any time to get help. And it was kind of cool, because as we started going through the year, kids would come in during that tutorial time just to tell me hi, or to show me their new chicken, or show me their turtle, or show me something that they built out in their backyard with their siblings. And the other thing that they were doing is they were going on vacation as a family, but they were still meeting with me and showing me where they were. So I started learning just how important that connection really was. And then also learning about connecting with them as a human being, just as not a math student. So those are kind of some of the things that I want to share with you. I've got a couple of stories. I want to share about what I learned about expectations, what I learned about assumptions that I tended to make all the time and didn't know I was doing that, and then what I learned about my tone. So first off was expectations. Oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. I told you I'm not a tech person. Let's try this. Okay, so I believe that expectations are super important. And we have to let our kids know what the expectations are. We got to let them know what the boundaries are, because otherwise, well, they're going to try to push them anyway. But in order for them to be successful, they have to have an idea of what the boundaries and expectations are. So I had set up what I thought made sense in the classroom, things about how to raise your hand when you wanted to talk to me, how to type your questions in the chat, things like you need to get up like you normally would, you can't wear pajamas to class, you need to be sitting up. I thought all that stuff was very, very clear until one morning. This was probably about October, November, something like that. And I had a young man that joined the class because he was quarantined. And when he turned on his camera, he was sitting up in bed. And so I asked him to get out of bed and sit in a table, because we can't learn when we're sitting in bed. He said, "Yes, ma'am," very politely, and stood up. And all he had on was his tidy whities. And oh my gosh, the whole group, I had 46 kids in my class right now, or at that time. They're all cracking up. He's trying to cover his parts. I'm messing with the computer, trying to find the button to turn off his camera. And I mean, it was just like a nightmare way to start our lesson. We finally got it all together, and he said he was sorry. But you know what I realized? He did exactly what I said. I said, you have to be sitting up and you cannot have on pajamas. And he did that. I learned that while my expectation was very clear to me, it wasn't clear to the kids. So after class, I had to go in and change my rule to sitting up at a table and that you have to have on clothes. But I took that information back when I went back into the classroom because, I really thought I had clear expectations, like raise your hand. I mean, how hard can that be? But in my mind, this is raise your hand. And so when a child would do this or whoo, 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 or kind of lay on their desk and barely raise it, it appeared that they were not following directions. And I'm pretty sure I said to them, okay, you're supposed to raise your hand. This is how we raise our hand. And so after that, I started going through the rules that I'd set, the procedures, the expectations, and we actually practiced them and I modeled them because I wanted to make sure I was setting them up for success. And when my expectations weren't clear, then I was getting frustrated with them, and they were really not the ones that were the problem. It was the way that I did it. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to share with you is about assumptions. And man, this one really kind of rocked my world. I always tried to get to know my kids in the classroom. Sorry, but like I said before, I really was getting to know them as a math student, not as a human being. And I realized I made assumptions. So I had this one little boy, his name is John. And John was in the full year virtual, and he would come to class every day. He was on time. He was clean. He was well groomed, super smart, super respectful. He would always respond during discussions. And he was one of those kids that would stop and think for a minute. He didn't just say something. When he talked, he had something to say. And so if I had him in my classroom, I would have assumed he was one of those kids that I like to call the always kids. They always do what they're supposed to. They're always respectful. They always have their stuff. They always do their assignments. That kid that we don't really need to spend much time because they're going to be successful anyway. Well, because I was in his house through the virtual learning, the table that he sat at every day was always cluttered with trash, with empty snack bags. There were always things like Cheetos or Takis that were like crunched up and smushed all over the table. One time there was a glass of spilled milk that was all over the table, and nobody was bothering to clean it up. And behind him, the wall behind where he sat every day was covered scribbles with markers and crayons. And if that's not bad enough, in the background, the adults in his family and his young siblings, John was 10 and he was the oldest, but he had two younger siblings. All I could hear in the background was constant screaming, and the F word dropped about every 3 or 4 words. And it wasn't like they were all angry all the time. They just yelled. They always yelled and cussed like crazy. And so this kid who seemed to have it all together, like, I don't even know how he functioned. I don't know how he was able to be so respectful and so intelligent and actually do his work when this is the kind of life that he lived in. And then I had another little girl named Brooke, and Brooke struggled. She struggled with everything, and she hated school. And I think she hated virtual school even more than she hated regular school. I don't know that she combed her hair all year long, and she didn't like to be seen. She didn't want to be seen or heard. She, always was turning her microphone off. And so this is a child that when they would walk into my regular classroom, I would have made an assumption that they did not have a strong family life. But this little girl, her mom was always right there. And I could hear her mom next to her say, Brooke, you need to turn on your camera for Dr. Curtis. Brooke, you need to open your book. And she would meet with me almost every day during tutorials. And the mom was sitting there saying, I know you can do this, Brooke. Just do one more problem. And then sometimes the mom would get online with me asking what she could do to help. And there were some things that she didn't understand that I was teaching. And the mom wanted me to teach her so that she could teach her child. So here I'm assuming that this little girl has no support at home, and John has all the support at home, and I couldn't have been more wrong. And so when I went back into the classroom, I really started trying to make real connections with the students, not just where they were as a math student, but who they were as a human being. And I think it's really, really important that we, keep that boundary. I'm the teacher, you're the student. I'm not your buddy. I really don't want to know that your boyfriend broke up with you. But to find that way that we can actually learn about the students' lives and learning things that they are actually interested in, so we can make that connection with them, because the kids need to know, I care about you because you're a human being, not just because you're good in math. And the other thing I started doing, because I could hear the parents in the background, and parents would pop in sometimes to tell me hi. So I started making phone calls to parents when I went back to the classroom, because you really can't get to know anybody in an email. And it's really easy in an email to assume that somebody's ticked off, or maybe they are ticked off and they sound just fine. So I started calling parents just kind of to check in, or, to let them know I enjoyed having their child in my class or whatever. But by doing that, I could hear the background at their home. You could hear the parent's voice. And sometimes I would start learning about struggles that were happening at home that I was never seeing with the kids. So, and it kind of changed how I dealt with my colleagues as well, because I quit making assumptions that just because they were there with a smile didn't mean that they had their life together, didn't mean that everything was okay. So that power of assumptions was a super important life lesson. And then the last one has to do with tone. I've always been very aware of the way that I spoke. I wanted to make sure that I was uplifting kids and not being smart aleck to them. But this became very apparent. It started back in 2000. I went to a conference and Hal Urban was a speaker. I don't even know what he talked about, but he put this quote up on the board, and it just transformed the way that I spoke. And so when I came back, I typed it up. I put it on my notebook so I could read it every single day in class. And I want to share that quote with you real quick. It's by Chaim Janot, and I know I'm saying it wrong. I think that's phonetically how you say it, but it goes like this. I have come to a frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humor, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. And y'all, I just think that speaks volume. It reminds me of the power that we have in our classrooms, the power to make a difference in these lives, these children's lives by the words that come out of our mouth. And you know, the other thing that happened, everything was recorded. Every word that came out of my mouth was recorded. All of my actions were recorded. And so it made me even more aware, because I hate to say this, but when I was in the classroom, there were times where I had just had it. You got on my last nerve, and I would respond out of frustration and anger. But when I was teaching virtually, I couldn't do that because it was all recorded. Everybody would know what I said. They would know how I acted. And so when I went back to the room, I would always ask myself, would you say this if their mother was sitting at the table right here? And if the answer was no, then I don't need to be talking like that. And so the things I wanted to share, just, you know, just how teaching virtually really gives us a different look inside our children's lives, and we can see them in their environment. And that's just a very powerful thing. The last thing, just real quickly, when I went back into the classroom, I had discovered how powerful virtual education is. And so I started using it in my room. The first year I went back, I had a little girl that started the year in DEAP, the alternative school, because she was waiting to go to trial for stabbing her aunt. And so she couldn't be in the classroom. And, you know, it's hard to teach math without a book. The kids didn't have any kind of book, and it's hard just to write about it. So I got permission from the district for her to meet with me virtually. So every day she was in my class for math instruction, because, you know, these kids need to know, yes, what you did is wrong and you can't be here interacting with us, but I still care about you and I still care about you learning. So I used it that way. The other thing was, after COVID, everybody decided they could start going on vacation every February because the rates were cheaper, or they wanted to go the week before spring break so it wasn't so busy. But I started offering virtual learning for my students when they were sick or when they were on vacation. And that way they could just tune in with me. They could get their lesson, do their assignment, and then they weren't behind when they got back. And then the last thing was, I believe some kids thrive in virtual education. So for those kids in my room that really needed to move on, I created virtual classes for them so that they could learn at their own pace instead of having to wait for everybody else. And I think that is something we are missing in public schools, that we don't see the value of virtual learning. So there's my story. Thank you for being with me today. And I would love to hear from you guys now.
Lori, that was really good. You definitely humanized it a lot for us. And I think many of us may have wanted to forget what happened during COVID, but it was real, and the students were real, and the experiences were real. So I'll just wait to see if anyone has any questions. Feel free to type it in the chat. But that was really good. They're talking about the heart emojis in the chat. If you want to see the chat, you can just click on the left-hand side. Looks like little bubbles.
Do
like
I need
bubbles.
to do something different for questions? I'm
No,
not sure how to unshare my screen.
no, you're fine. Can you hear me, Lori?
Thank you for that comment.
All right, Lori. I want to thank you for the presentation again.